The lights dimmed to a surgical blue, and the lecture hall's 1,000 tiny lenses irised inward like nocturnal eyes. A hologram rose from the dais, steel sprouting legs, a barrel chest of cage turbines, and a crown of interlocking blades that flexed like a metal flower ready to bloom. When the instructor toggled the audio feed, the machine screamed. Several cadets recoiled. A Seleth with transparent eyelids folded both pairs tight and folded again. A Branite's dorsal quills flattened in a clatter like dropped cutlery. Even the walls, alive with adaptive sound baffling, shivered as if they, too, preferred silence. Instructor Valar let the noise run until it filled the chamber with a lacquer of dread. He stood tall and luminous, his chitin plates polished to a mirror sheen. "Observe the Shriekfang," he intoned. "A war-remnant predator. It hunts by sound, heat, and movement. It does not negotiate, sympathize, or tire. If it hears your fear, it accelerates." A dozen alien languages murmured at once. From the center bench, Daniel Cross leaned back and puffed out a slow breath. He had the kind of face that stayed calm by habit, like a mechanic who has seen worse jammed in worse places. The hologram spooled into a diagram: torque curves, claw pressure, blade pitch, response time. Valar's voice clicked on each statistic with priestly severity. "Primed blades spin at 42,000 revolutions per." Daniel laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It just slipped out the way a memory does when it refuses to behave. A few heads jerked toward him. The hologram shrieked on, outraged machinery given a throat. Valar paused. "Human cadet. Is the lesson amusing?" Daniel's smile was apologetic, but not repentant. "Sorry, instructor. It's just, where I'm from, we call that a chainsaw that got ideas." Ripples of offense coursed through the hall. The Branite hissed. The Seleth emitted a fluting note of disbelief. Valar's pupils narrowed to knife points. "A chainsaw," he repeated, tasting the word as if it might be toxic. "You trivialize a battlefield apex predator." "I recognize it," Daniel said. "Different paint, same bite. The Shriek is just bad bearings and a mean temperament." Valar gestured, and the projection zoomed to magnify teeth like grain-scored moons. "This creature harvested living armor from Seth barricades. It shredded boarding parties into particulate fog." The Shriekfang's audio peaked again, a metallic wail that set nerves on edge. Daniel's memory, inconvenient as humor, blossomed into a smell: hot sap, burned chain oil, winter air so cold it squeaked in his lungs. He saw it, a sawmill back home in the Appalachian Ridge Works, the day his uncle swapped out a stubborn clutch in freezing wind, laughing at the blood on his knuckles because nothing else would get the sting out. Valar's mandibles clicked. "Explain the laughter." "Where we grew up," Daniel said. "You learn not to let the noise tell you what something is. Loud doesn't equal smart. It's a machine. Machines are patterns. Patterns can be broken." A chittering whisper traveled the tiers. The Academy prided itself on collecting the galaxy's best young minds and grinding them against the galaxy's hardest truths. It did not pride itself on students laughing in the middle of a fear demonstration. Valar muted the audio. The silence felt like pressure after a dive. "Step forward, Cadet Cross." Daniel stood, palms open. Uniform neat, boots clean, eyes steady. He looked older than 22 in the way people do after the world has pressed a thumb into their lives and left a mark there. "Humanity," Valar said to the class, "is from a death world, corrosive air, predatory fauna, weaponized climate. They wear stubbornness like armor and sarcasm like a blade. They confuse recklessness with bravery." He tilted his head at Daniel. "Demonstrate the difference." "How would you like that demonstrated, sir?" Daniel asked, polite as a hinge. "By respect," Valar said. "You will regard the Shriekfang with appropriate caution. Caution and fear aren't synonyms. I will calibrate your vocabulary." The hologram dissolved into tactical telemetry, range arcs, thermal cones, a scatterplot of fatalities. Valar's claw traced a red band. "This is the critical zone. Inside it, a Shriekfang's pursuit is mathematically inevitable." Daniel lifted a hand. Not if the floor's uneven and the bearings are running hot. Speak plainly. You can hear it, Daniel said, and some of the cadets leaned in despite themselves because his tone was mild and unafraid. That scream? It's laboring. The load isn't centered. I'd bet the chassis bucks under torque at high RPM. That's leverage you can exploit. The celluth with the transparent lids clicked in their own language. Daniel glanced over, smiled. Think of it like a hunting kite in a crosswind, he said. If you tug at the right moment, it yaws. Valar made a dismissive sound that nevertheless carried. The Academy teaches principles, not folklore from logging camps. Principles are what folklore becomes when you write them down and work the edges, Daniel said. Sir? The hall held still. Very well, Valar said. We will shift from hypothetical to practical. He tapped a control, the dais lowered. A live trial in the training pit. Hisses and gasps. The Branite quills stood back up like a field after wind has passed. Daniel felt his pulse bump against his wrist bone and settled it with breath. He hadn't meant to provoke a demonstration. He had meant to keep a lie out of the room. That fear is wisdom, that noise is mastery, that screaming metal deserves reverence. 2 cadets whispered near him, voices pitched for privacy and failing at it. Humans mock death. Or they are numb to it. He didn't turn. He remembered the smell of pitch in winter. He remembered the sound a chain makes just before it seizes. The floor plates parted to reveal the training pit, an oval of composite sand punctuated by hazard pylons and one rough stack of salvage, twisted plating, an old pipe, loose mesh. Above, the observation gallery lit itself like a crescent of watching stars. Parameters, Valar said, voice amplified. 1 Shriekfang unit. Arena boundary fixed. Lethality limited by Academy safeguards. Cadet Cross may use any object within the pit. No ranged weapons. He faced Daniel. Do you still laugh? Depends, Daniel said. Will maintenance be offended if I fix it mid-lesson? A few students exhaled something like a laugh and then smothered it, unsure if it was permitted. Enter, Valar said. The gate sighed. Daniel stepped through. The sound hit first. Live metal, not a recording. The machine's scream had texture now, a jitter that vibrated bone. The Shriekfang descended from a shackle cradle, legs splaying, blades yawning to full span. Heat shimmered off its belly, vent fins pulsed with predatory breath. Its optics combed the arena, then snapped to Daniel like magnets find iron. He rolled his shoulders once, the way he had before stepping under a lifted engine. He catalogued the ground, abrasive particulate, good for traction. The pylon spacing, irregular, useful. The salvage stack, messy, better. The Shriekfang's gate, heavy front bias, small rear corrections, panic-proof straight-line speed, per corner discipline. Begin, Valar said. The Shriekfang leapt, and Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't sprint. He moved like a shop hand threading through crowded space, attention precise. The machine overshot its first line, skated a fraction on the sand, corrected with a snarl of pitch. He felt the torque buck through the floor. Hello, Tuesday, he murmured. The second rush came with a lateral feint. He cut across its bow, made it turn where it preferred to charge. The blades chattered as speed and angle fought. He reached the salvage, palmed the length of pipe, and tested its weight. Too thin to break the housing clean. Thick enough to jam a mouth if he timed it. Up in the gallery, whispers rose. He's not running. Why is he smiling? Because he sees something we don't. Daniel slid between pylons, feeding the Shriekfang a route that looked like opportunity and concealed geometry. It took the bait twice, grinding sand into a scree that worked like ball bearings. On the third pass, it clipped a pylon and stuttered, a hiccup in the scream. Bearings, he thought. There you are. Instructor, he called without looking up. What's the penalty for cosmetic damage? Survival is the only metric, Valar said. Good policy. He dropped the pipe, marked the way it bounced. He picked up mesh instead, a lattice of wire with a half-torn frame. He shook it once to feel its bite. The Shriekfang recalibrated and prowled, optics hungry, It lunged again, blades singing. Daniel stepped into the lunge, not away, letting the machine's own speed create the moment. Humor wasn't bravado. It was a hinge that turned fear into focus. He set the mesh, angled the frame, and felt the force shudder into his arms. The blades kissed the wire, bit, and snarled. The screen went up a register, a dog catching its teeth on chain link. "Got you," Daniel said, voice low. He twisted, fed the mess of wire deeper, and let the machine's torque wind its own trap. The Shriekfang thrashed, trying to chew through the snare. The frame wedged. Bearings howled. Heat spiked. The rear leg stuttered. He pivoted, kept clear of the kill arc, and watched how the body wanted to fall. Valar's voice cut in, measured despite surprise. "Cadet Cross. Explain your actions for the record." "Just listening," Daniel said. "It told me where it breaks." The machine tore free and backed, wounded pride in steel form. Daniel's heart tapped faster now. He could feel the edge in his lungs, but the line through the chaos stayed straight. He lifted the pipe again, not as a weapon but as a lever, and glanced at the uneven pylon foot he noted on entry. "Noise isn't mastery," he said, almost to himself. "Pattern is." He moved to meet the next rush, already placing the world in his hands. And when the Shriekfang screamed and sprang, the class leaned forward as one, the lesson becoming something none of them had expected, not reverence for a predator, but recognition of a machine, and of a human who refused to be taught fear. The next morning, the Academy's corridors felt like a living rumor. Every species had its own way of whispering, some with antennae clicks, some with subharmonic pulses, some with scents so faint that only their kin could detect them. Daniel Cross didn't need translation. He caught the sideways glances, the pauses in conversation when he walked past, the unmistakable weight of curiosity tinged with alarm. He kept his stride even. His boots clicked against the composite floor, a noise too ordinary to compete with the memory of yesterday's scream. Yet the silence that followed him carried something heavier than the Shriekfang's metallic howl: expectation. At the intersection near the mess hall, 3 cadets blocked his way without meaning to. A celith, still folding and unfolding its transparent lids, stared at him openly. Beside it, a feathered Corian shifted from claw to claw, wings twitching with nervous energy. The third, a young Branite with stiff dorsal quills, finally spoke. "You didn't run." Daniel stopped, adjusting his collar as if the statement required inspection. "That's true." "You laughed," the Corian added, his voice light but incredulous. "Who laughs when a predator opens its blades?" Daniel shrugged. "Where I come from, fear isn't the only response to noise." The Celith tilted its head, alien pupils dilating. "You dishonored the lesson. Instructor Valar teaches us that reverence keeps us alive." "Reverence doesn't stop the gears from stripping," Daniel replied evenly. "Machines aren't gods. They break like anything else." The Branite's quills rippled, a sign of unease. "Then you claim the Shriekfang is not dangerous?" "Oh, it's dangerous," Daniel said. "So is a logging saw when you're 14 and too stubborn to wear gloves. You respect the bite, but you don't worship the noise it makes while spinning." That silenced them for a moment. Not agreement, not yet, but they didn't press him further. The Branite finally muttered something to the others, and they stepped aside, still studying him as though waiting for cracks to show. The mess hall wasn't quieter. A broad ring of species ate beneath holographic banners, their trays designed to suit diets ranging from liquid protein to mineral slurries. Daniel collected a ration bar and black coffee, slid into a corner seat, and tried to ignore the hum of observation. A shadow fell across the table. Another cadet, taller, lean, with mottled gray skin and elongated arms, lowered himself opposite Daniel. He was a Vaer, a species known for analytical detachment. "You are either reckless," the Vaer said, "or conditioned." "Which?" Daniel chewed, swallowed. "Conditioned, maybe. You grow up around enough things that can kill you, you learn not to give them the satisfaction of your panic." The Vaer leaned forward. "You have seen worse than a Shriekfang?" Daniel smirked faintly. "Worse? Maybe not louder, but sure. We've got storms that flatten towns, forest fires that race faster than you can run, animals with teeth long as your arm. And machines, well, machines fail. Sometimes in ways that make the Shriekfang look polite. The Veer blinked once, slowly. And your response is laughter. It's not comedy, Daniel said. It's survival. Humor cuts the fear down to size. You laugh, you keep breathing, you keep moving. The second you freeze, the thing wins. The Veer sat back, contemplative, then rose without another word. Conversation resumed in the hall, though Daniel knew the echoes of his words were already spreading. Instructor Valar summoned him before afternoon drills. The office smelled faintly of ozone and polish. Walls gleamed with weapons trophies from campaigns Daniel had never heard of. The Shriekfang schematic hovered on one panel, suspended like an accusation. Valar stood at the center, mandibles tense. You disrupted the lesson. I didn't intend disrespect, Daniel said carefully. I just recognized what I saw. You equated it with a tool from your world. You made a predator into an object of ridicule. I made it into what it is, a machine. Valar's eyes narrowed to cold slits. Machines are extensions of will. They kill as surely as any beast. When the Shriekfang shredded regiments, did those soldiers survive by laughing? No, Daniel admitted. But they didn't survive by freezing either. You seek to turn arrogance into philosophy. I'm saying fear isn't the only teacher. We learn by engagement, by breaking patterns down. If I don't treat it like a puzzle, I've already lost. Valar clicked his claws against the desk. Then you will have your opportunity. Tomorrow, the trial will proceed. A live Shriekfang, unmodified. You will face it without aid. If your laughter is truly survival, prove it. Daniel's jaw tightened. And if I don't? Then your classmates will witness the truth of Death World bravado. And your people's reputation will remain where it belongs, among curiosities, not equals. Daniel nodded once. Then I'll see you in the pit. That evening, he sat alone in the cadets' quarters, a single lamp casting long shadows across his bunk. The murmur of the academy drifted faintly through the walls. He rolled the ration bar wrapper between his fingers, listening to the crinkle, letting the sound steady him. He wasn't immune to fear. His pulse still quickened when he pictured the Shriekfang's blades churning inches from his skin. But fear didn't own him. It never had. On Earth, survival wasn't a lesson taught in classrooms, it was folded into every day. He thought of his uncle's sawmill again, the sound of chainsaws splitting oak, the acrid bite of oil, the laughter when something nearly went wrong but didn't. He thought of storms tearing across the plains, of engines rattling to failure mid-flight, of neighbors fixing what could have killed them hours before. Laughter wasn't defiance. It was acknowledgement. A way of saying, I see you, I know you, and you won't break me. The dormitory door slid open. The Brandite from earlier stepped in, quills lowered this time. He hesitated, then approached Daniel's bunk. You will face the Shriekfang tomorrow, he said. Looks that way. You believe you can defeat it? Daniel looked up, voice quiet but firm. I believe it can be beaten. Belief is different from arrogance. The Brandite's quills rustled softly. If you succeed, others will see humans differently. If you fail, they will dismiss you as noise. Daniel gave a thin smile. Then I'll just have to make sure the noise is worth listening to. The Brandite inclined his head, a gesture of reluctant respect, and left. Daniel lay back, staring at the ceiling until his eyelids grew heavy. Tomorrow, the galaxy would watch whether a human's laughter could cut deeper than blades. And in the quiet, just before sleep claimed him, he whispered to no one in particular. Machines break. That's what they do. And so will you. The arena's gates slid apart with a grinding sigh, releasing a burst of recycled air tinged with ozone and dust. Above, the viewing gallery thrummed with restless energy. Hundreds of cadets leaned over the rails, eyes wide, mandibles twitching, feathers quivering. The word had already spread. The human was going to face the Shriekfang alone. Daniel Cross stepped onto the composite sand. The pit was oval, ringed with hazard pylons and scattered debris from previous trials, burnt plating, fractured pipes, and jagged mesh. Harsh lights washed everything flat, as though the place had been designed not for combat but for exposure. There was nowhere to hide. On the dais above, Instructor Valar's silhouette loomed. His voice carried, sharpened by amplification. "Cadets of the Academy, observe. Humanity's representative believes laughter is strength. Today, the Shriekfang will correct his delusion." The platform at the far end split open. Steam hissed. Chains retracted, metal shrieked, and the Predator descended. The Shriekfang landed with the weight of a falling engine. Its legs splayed, claws carving furrows through the sand. Its torso housed a turbine chamber that roared into spin, blades unfurling like wings of serrated steel. Its screams surged up the gallery walls until even sound dampeners stuttered against the vibration. Most cadets flinched. Daniel didn't. His chest tightened, sure, but he'd expected that. Fear always knocked first. What mattered was what you did after opening the door. "Begin," Valar commanded. The Shriekfang lunged. Daniel moved sideways, not back. Retreat was instinct, and instinct was what the machine hunted. He skimmed along the edge of the pit, measuring stride length, timing the pitch of its turbine. The thing was fast, brutally so, but momentum dragged it wide on turns. It overshot, corrected, and screamed again. "Too much torque," Daniel muttered under his breath. "You're fighting yourself." He slid behind a pylon as the Predator charged again. The impact shook the post, spraying sand across his boots. The Shriekfang's blades carved sparks from the barrier, shrieking like tortured wire. Daniel ducked low, grabbed a discarded length of pipe, and tested its balance. Too light for crushing force. But leverage? That was another story. The Shriekfang reoriented. Its sensors flared red, locking on his heat signature. It thundered forward. Daniel sprinted diagonally, baiting it toward the salvage pile. The ground vibrated with each strike of its claws. He reached the twisted mesh, yanked free a half-melted frame, and whipped it between his hands like a net. The Shriekfang bore down, blades a storm of metal. Daniel stepped into the arc, not away. Timing was everything. He snapped the mesh upward, feeding it into the teeth. The Predator screamed higher, grinding through the wires. Sparks cascaded. The frame caught, twisted, and wedged. The Shriekfang bucked, turbines surging to compensate. Daniel felt the heat radiating from its core, sweat prickling under his collar. He didn't waste a moment. He jammed the pipe into the gap between the mesh and a spinning blade, leaned his weight, and wrenched. Metal shrieked against metal. Bearings howled. The Shriekfang staggered, losing symmetry. Its left side shuddered violently, gouging trenches in the sand. From the gallery, a wave of exclamations erupted. The aliens had never seen anyone stand that close to the machine, much less force it off balance. Daniel gritted his teeth, shoulders straining. The pipe bent. The frame twisted. Finally, the blade sheared loose, ricocheting into the sand with a scream of its own. The Shriekfang reeled, one arm of its crown crippled. "Not invincible, are you?" Daniel muttered, lungs burning. The Predator retaliated with wild ferocity, slamming its weight sideways. The impact threw him hard against a pylon. Pain flared across his ribs. He tasted copper. But he pushed off the post before it could pin him, rolling through the grit. The Shriekfang charged again, staggering slightly on its damaged side. Daniel forced himself upright, pipe still in hand. He backed toward the salvage pile, searching for something stronger, heavier. His eyes caught on a length of fractured plating lodged upright in the sand. The machine thundered after him, shrieking louder as if volume alone could make up for lost precision. Daniel cut left at the last second, dragging the Shriekfang across the uneven ground. It clipped the plating, stumbled, and faltered. He pivoted, swung the pipe like a lever, and jammed it into the turbine vent. For an instant, the world became noise, grinding, screeching, sparks flying in a violent spray. The pipe tore free, bent almost double, but the turbine sputtered. The Shriekfang staggered, its scream warbling, off-pitch. Daniel planted his feet, blood trickling from a split on his forehead. His chest heaved, but his voice was steady. You sound like my neighbor's lawnmower on a bad day. A ripple of laughter, uneasy, incredulous, swept the gallery. Even fear couldn't fully silence the absurdity of the human's comparison. The Shriekfang whirled clumsily, now slower, blades uneven. It lunged again, but its movements betrayed desperation. Daniel sidestepped, shoved the broken pipe into its stabilizer joint, and pushed with every ounce of strength. The joint snapped with a metallic crack. The machine collapsed onto one side, turbines screaming in protest. Daniel scrambled onto its back, ripped free another piece of mesh, and jammed it deep into the intake vent. The shriek turned into a grinding death rattle. Heat scorched his hands, but he held fast until the turbines choked and sputtered out. Finally, silence. The Shriekfang lay convulsing, sparks coughing from its joints. Its blades twitched once, then sagged limp. Smoke curled upward, acrid and bitter. Daniel climbed down, breath ragged, uniform streaked with blood and sand. He stood over the wreck, pipe still clutched in one hand, and raised his eyes to the gallery. Cadets stared in stunned quiet. The Branite's quills lay flat, the Celitha's lids frozen open, the Corian's wings tucked tight. Even the Veyor who had questioned him earlier tilted his head with something that looked almost like respect. Daniel wiped a streak of blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. His grin was thin but unmistakable. Guess it wasn't so scary after all. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the gallery erupted, not cheers exactly, but a roar of disbelief, awe, and scattered applause. Valar raised a claw, silencing them. His voice boomed, sharp as ever but edged now with something he could not conceal. Survival achieved. Trial concluded. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain. He dropped the bent pipe, the clang echoing in the hollow arena. The Shriekfang twitched once more and then went still. He turned toward the gate, every muscle aching, every breath weighted with fatigue, but his stride steady. He hadn't come to show off. He hadn't even come to win. He'd come to prove a truth. Noise was just noise, machines could break, and fear only had the power you gave it. As the gate closed behind him, the whispers began again, but they were different now. No longer suspicion, no longer derision. Curiosity had shifted to respect. And in the echo of the silence he left behind, Daniel knew the Academy would never look at humans quite the same way again. The medbay lights were too bright, almost clinical to the point of cruelty. Daniel sat on the edge of the examination table, chest wrapped in compression bandages, his left arm peppered with burns from the Shriekfang's turbine. He ignored the sting. Pain was temporary. Perception was what lingered. The medic, a quiet Dravine with glassy skin, hissed while applying salve. You should not be walking. Daniel managed a half-smile. You think I should crawl instead? The Dravine clicked its mandibles in disapproval, but Daniel caught the faint curve of amusement. Even here, humor chipped through walls. When the door slid open, the hush that entered was heavier than silence. Instructor Valar stepped inside, chitin gleaming under the sterile light. His gait was measured, his mandibles tight. Behind him trailed two cadets, one Branite with quills angled respectfully low, and the Veyor who had interrogated Daniel in the mess hall. Cadet Cross, Valar said. His tone was clipped, but it lacked the edge of disdain. You survived. Daniel leaned back, expression mild. I noticed. The Branite's voice was soft, hesitant. You dismantled the predator with nothing but salvage and instinct. I used its noise against it, Daniel corrected. Everything that screams is telling you something. Most people just don't listen. The Veyor studied him for a long moment. Your laughter, was it calculated? Daniel shook his head. No. It's how my people cope. You laugh when the storm rips the roof off, when the engine fails mid-flight, when the odds say you shouldn't be here tomorrow but you are anyway. It doesn't make the danger less real, but it makes you real enough to face it. The Branite's quills bristled faintly, not in aggression but recognition. We mistook it for mockery. It wasn't mockery, Daniel said. It was defiance. There's a difference. Valar's mandibles clicked, a sound caught between irritation and thought. You equated an apex predator with a tool from your primitive world. And I beat it the same way we fix tools back home, Daniel replied. By figuring out where it breaks. The medic finished his work and stepped back. Valar lingered another breath before inclining his head slightly, not a bow, but a concession. The Academy does not commend insolence. But today, it must acknowledge results. When they left, Daniel finally exhaled, shoulders sagging. He hadn't expected praise. Survival was its own argument. 2 days later, the Academy auditorium filled with cadets from every species. The Shriekfang's wreckage had been hauled into the chamber, twisted and burned, its blades shattered. It looked smaller now, stripped of menace, just metal broken in the shape of a beast. Valar addressed the assembly. This trial was intended as caution. Yet it has become instruction. Humanity has demonstrated resilience. He let the word linger, clearly reluctant to grant it. Murmurs rippled across the hall. Daniel sat among the cadets, uniform crisp despite the stiffness in his ribs. Eyes darted his way, some wary, some curious, many edged with newfound respect. The Vaer who had spoken with him before stood and asked, Instructor, what do we learn from this? That not all predators are what they appear, Valar said, gaze sliding toward Daniel. And not all cadets learn the same lessons the same way. Daniel felt the weight of those words. The acknowledgement wasn't for him alone, it was for his people. That evening the mess hall buzzed with voices that no longer fell silent when Daniel entered. A Corian cadet with iridescent feathers perched across from him. When you laughed, she said, eyes wide, I thought you'd lost your mind. But afterward, it made sense. You weren't trying to provoke. You were grounding yourself. Daniel sipped his coffee. Exactly. If you don't take control of your own fear, something else will. She tilted her head. Your world truly is as dangerous as they say? Dangerous, yes. But that's why we're like this. You grow up surrounded by storms, predators, machines that can maim you if you blink wrong. You either adapt, or you don't make it. The cadet leaned closer, feathers trembling. Do all humans laugh at death? Daniel chuckled softly. Not all. Some cry, some pray, some freeze. But the ones who laugh? They usually make it further. The cadet sat back, thoughtful, as the hall filled with overlapping conversations. Daniel knew the story would spread, retold, reshaped, exaggerated until the details blurred. But the core would remain, the human who laughed at the predator and walked away. Later that night, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck. Beyond the glass, Virilia's sky glowed faintly with the auroras of its charged atmosphere. The stars were sharp, unblinking. He pressed a hand against the cool surface, letting the silence wrap him. He thought of home, of sawdust in the air, of engines that groaned before failing, of storms that shook the walls until laughter was the only way to stay sane. He thought of how small Earth was compared to the vastness out here, and yet how stubbornly its people refused to bend. Footsteps approached. It was Valar again, posture rigid but not hostile. He stood beside Daniel, watching the auroras. You've unsettled the Academy, Valar said quietly. Not the first time humans have unsettled someone, Daniel replied. The instructor's mandibles twitched. You turned a predator into a lesson. Cadets now look at you and see possibility. That may be more dangerous than the Shriekfang itself. Daniel didn't look away from the glass. Then let them see. Fear doesn't have to rule them. For a long moment, silence held. Then Valar inclined his head the slightest degree. Do not mistake acknowledgement for approval. But you have earned a place here that cannot be ignored. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. The next morning, Daniel walked through the Academy's corridors and noticed the difference. The whispers had changed. No longer derision, no longer skepticism. Now they carried weight, curiosity, admiration, even envy. The Branite cadet approached him in the hall, quills angled low in a gesture of respect. Your laughter will be remembered, human. Perhaps feared. But respected. Daniel gave a small nod. That's enough. Weeks later, the Academy archived the footage of the trial. It circulated beyond Virelia, carried on cadet transmissions to homeworlds across the galaxy. On worlds where the Shriekfang was legend, people watched a human laugh at it and dismantle it piece by piece. The story fractured into versions. Some claimed he mocked death itself. Others said he turned fear into a weapon. The truth didn't matter as much as the effect. Humanity's reputation shifted. No longer were they curiosities from a violent planet. They were something else entirely, an unpredictable force that could stare down terror and smile. Daniel didn't chase the fame. He kept attending lectures, sparring in drills, drinking bitter coffee in the mess hall. But everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Not with suspicion now, but with the weight of respect earned in the pit. One evening, alone in his quarters, Daniel wrote a brief note in his personal log. He kept it simple, because simplicity was what lasted. The galaxy feared the screaming predator. Humanity just called it Tuesday. He leaned back, let the words settle, and laughed quietly to himself. Not mockery. Not arrogance. Just recognition that sometimes, survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes, it was about refusing to let the noise own you. And with that, Daniel closed the log, turned off the light, and let the silence wash over him, ready for whatever tomorrow's storm would bring.